You know, with the content on this channel over the last couple of weeks, I've been dropping a few black pills, and I figured I'd drop one right now. I mean, I'm not even sure where to start. Like, uni is such a basket case when it comes to romantic relationships. It's ridiculous. I don't even know where I'm going to start with this video because I've seen some pretty spicy stuff in my 4 years at uni. Now, I'd like to remind you that n equals 1, of course, because there are two reasons why I'm releasing this. First of all, to suss if I'm not crazy, and express that I actually don't like this state of affairs. And second of all, to determine whether or not this is actually a common occurrence, because I've seen some things that just seem so out there that I'm not sure that they can be all that common, but I may well be wrong. So I guess I'll start with a very Catholic topic, hookups. Now, quite frankly, if you go to uni, hookups are almost entirely unavoidable, if you're a man or if you're a woman, unless you're one of the people that don't really go out. Like, I'm a pretty gregarious person, so I'm out quite a bit. And I have had some really crazy experiences beyond just the typical, you know, boy meets girl kind of thing. I mean, it's pretty typical that you'd expect this out of uni, but just the insanity of some of the women I've met is just on another level. Particularly if you reject them, I've noticed. So I'm gonna tell a few stories, I guess, and I want to hear in the comments if this is actually representative of the reality that you guys have experienced yourselves. Because I actually don't know if I'm just meeting crazy women repeatedly. Now, I don't think I have to explain to anyone what a hookup is, but one thing I do have to emphasize that I've seen at uni repeatedly is the relentless, unabating cheating going on. The cheating is everywhere. I'd say that around half of the women who have tried to hook up with me have had a boyfriend, and I think the most egregious case I can think of, and this has happened, I think, a couple of times, actually. Yeah, I can think of 2 times. Is when the boyfriend has actually been there in the room. And the woman's still gone and done it. So I went to a student group to kind of meet people. And I got talking to the leader of this group. And I just sort of listened to her and how her day had been. You know how you do? I just sat there, you know, made her laugh kind of thing. And talked to the guy that was there, and he was complaining that he couldn't find women. So I just sort of gave him a really typical of, like, you know, just persist kind of thing. But at the end of the day, we were in a McDonald's, and her boyfriend came along and sat next to her, and he was about what you'd expect. So it got to a point where I was going to go home, and she was really insistent on walking me home because apparently I was too drunk to walk home on my own, which I know I wasn't. Like, I was in first year, but I had a really strong I've always had a really strong tolerance of alcohol. And the boyfriend just kind of acquiesced. Like, this little girl who must have been about 5'2", walking me, who's 6'1", home. Right? Yeah, because, yeah, my protection is needed because I'm drunk. Yeah. Now, that's probably the most egregious example, but I'd say that at least half a dozen women have tried to cheat on their boyfriends with me at uni, and I've deliberately avoided that. I mean, I'm in STEM, I do computer science, so I don't see many women. So I have no idea what causes that, but I know that it's absolutely disgusting, and it drives me kind of mental. But another thing on top of that is the way that a lot of the women, I suppose, quote-unquote, flirt, because it's often very, very direct. It makes me really wonder, you know? The two that stick out to me, because they've happened in the last 3 or 4 months, and they're almost comical. One that sticks out to me is, this girl comes and leans on me, that I kind of knew relatively well, so it was fine. And she goes to me, "My housemate and his girlfriend are making too much noise." But I laugh, but it is horrific. I can't even believe it. That's why I'm laughing. And like, I think the worst one I've ever heard was I was with a friend of mine at a bar, and this girl comes up to me, tries to get my attention, and tries hugging me and, you know, doing that kind of thing. And I'm completely tuning her out because, you know, I'm a Catholic, I'm a committed Catholic, and I don't do that kind of thing. And her trump card is to say that she hates herself, and that's a flirt. She ended up following us for like half a mile when I'd already like really explicitly turned her down. Like I don't understand this persistence. It's this persistence and this just vulgar behaviour. Now, I have a few theories to do with this because, honestly, it's so common. Because I know people online who've experienced similar things. I know people in real life who've had similar experiences, like friends of mine. And I think a lot of it is that uni, for most people, is a tremendously lonely experience. And it hasn't been for me, because I'm pretty gregarious, and I've always had friends at every single moment of my life, pretty much. I'm kind of blessed in that way. I'm not always in a relationship, and I'm not in one right now. I've never really had a long-term relationship. But I think that a lot of it is kind of loneliness. And that kind of leads into the next stage, which is the dates that I've been. Like, I'm actually saying this as like a... because I think it's disgusting, right? I have never had a date that has not gone sexual, or an attempt, like the woman has attempted to be sexual within the first hour. I remember once I took this really, admittedly, quite attractive Greek girl to mass. And then I took her to food afterwards, because I figured, you know, I'll give her the idea of what kind of man I am. And she starts essentially propositioning me within 20 minutes of sitting in the place to eat. Now, at the time, and I still think now, that I think a lot of women do this because they think that the only way to anchor into a relationship is to start on that kind of level. Of the relationships I've seen develop, even inside of the church, I think most of them started as just a hookup. And so I think what they're thinking is that, well, if I do that act, then I'll lock him down. Which is frankly not how I work. And so I tried to kind of steer it into a different direction, but eventually after the second date I decided, well, there's too many issues here. I'm never gonna build anything with this woman, because she's just got so many issues. And that brings me on to the third section. I think that every other girl at uni has some form of mild personality disorder, or major one. I don't understand where it comes from. I think it may come from the fact that families have just kind of broken down over the last 20 or 30 years. But there are so many women walking around with these severe anxiety disorders and severe personality disorders. And there's nothing really much I can do, but I can certainly tell you about the consequences of such things, because I've had some crazy things out of women who I thought were friends of mine, and as a result of these disorders. For example, there was this one girl who I knew who had, I think, borderline. I think she had borderline. She never told me, but I've kind of figured that out. And I was initially friends with her for a couple of reasons. First of all, I actually quite liked her, and I could see that she needed help. And also I figured she knew more girls, so I could meet girls, you know, I could have a relationship with, you know. Oh boy, that was a mistake. So I'll start with me shutting her down about 10 times on me formally dating her, because I was never interested. I just wanted to be friends with her, but she never got the message. Well, until the next part, because I tried to sort of get to know a friend of hers, and all of a sudden she sort of disappeared off the map. And then I tried to get to know another friend of hers, and she disappeared off the map. You sensing a van here? And with the second one, I think it was, it may have been a third one, I can't remember. But with the third one, this girl messaged me telling me that she told her that I only wanted her for sex. And naturally, I was not very amused by this state of affairs. And I was even less happy with the state of affairs when she decided to make this big confession of, like, love or something. And so I blocked her on everything and ran a mile. But boy, oh boy, if you think it ends there, you're wrong. You are dead wrong. So 6 months later, I think, a friend of mine messages me saying that this girl's written a poem. And it's a poem about someone who's like a thinly veiled version of me putting 4 kids in her and then leaving her. But the icing, the absolute icing on the cake, like, because I was kind of freaked out by that, was when she showed up to an event that I ran with just herself and her boyfriend. And she spent an hour and a half trying to talk to me. And I just deafed her out entirely, and my friends kind of handled her. And her boyfriend, oh, like, bless the man, right? He was just looking at the floor the whole time. The whole hour and a half. I kind of felt sorry for him. I can't remember if I decided to talk to him or not, but he was just looking at the floor as this girl was trying to talk to me. And this finally culminated the very next day in her going to another student group that she knew I was in and calumniating me. Thankfully, no one believed her, but you see the sorts of crazy I'm talking about. And, you know, like, I provide this as one example, but it's happened at least one other time. Because, frankly, it's starting to get to a point where I'm losing track. The most annoying one, though, is when you think you finally met a normal girl. Like, maybe a little bit neurotic or whatever, but, you know, she's kind of seems to be living on the same planet as you. And then one of these girls with a disorder comes along and decides to torpedo it. Like, in the most epic style possible. And, frankly, there are certain situations that I think that's happened in that I'm not certain of, but I'm certain that it's happened at least once with this woman. I can think of about 3 or 4 occasions where I've had suspicions. But I don't know if this is typical. I just know that it's there. And the most annoying one, though, is when you think you finally met a normal girl. Like, maybe a little bit neurotic or whatever, but, you know, she's kind of seems to be living on the same planet as you. And then one of these girls with a disorder comes along and decides to torpedo it. Like, in the most epic style possible. And, frankly, there are certain situations that I think that's happened in that I'm not certain of, but I'm certain that it's happened at least once with this woman. I can think of about 3 or 4 occasions where I've had suspicions. But I don't know if this is typical. I just know that it's there. But to be honest, it's not like most men are much saner. You remember the 1 in 5 statistic that everyone was whining about, I think 3 or 4 years ago? Like, oh, it's not got a good study behind it. Frankly, having been to uni, I don't think 1 in 5 girls are, like, raped. But I can certainly see why people would think that. Because the way, I'd say, maybe 30 or 40%, I've heard some guys say maybe even 70 or 80% of guys act around women, is frankly awful. Horrific. It's really creepy. I think one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, actually, was at the end of my first year when I saw this girl throwing up, who was in our little group for the, for a bunch of drinks. And I was keeping an eye on her because there was another guy who kept trying to touch her up while she was throwing up. Like, no word of a lie. No word of a lie. And I ended up, walking her to a taxi and making sure she was okay, because this guy was like, keep going, And I've seen it, like, so many times. You see it in nightclubs. I actually worked in a nightclub for 1 shift, and then I quit because I saw this kind of thing. It's disgusting. And in a lot of ways, I can understand why women are this damaged. From, kind of relatively mild things, like men leaning over women at parties, which is really weird, but not entirely insane, to some of the just, like horror story things I've heard about apparent sex parties that go on at my uni, right? Some of the horror story stuff, like A&E getting called kind of horror stories. I would not be shocked if, like, half of men were just these depraved animals who didn't view women as people, in that context anyway. And we can talk about the causes till the cows come home, and I'm gonna give a few. Now, I'm gonna take a stab and guess that 85% of men and maybe 75% of women's first experience of sex is with pornography. And pornography, like, there's nothing you can tell me anymore to not make me think it's evil. It's awful. It's just, there's no love at all. There's no conception of a relationship. It's just sterile and disgusting, and a lot of the times abusive, and uses drugs. And I mean, in itself, it's a drug. And I think a lot of this kind of behaviour is driven by that. In fact, in a lot of the ways that women have come onto me, it's been like something out of those kind of movies. Also, just the attitude towards sex is wrong. It's incorrect. There seems to be an almost uniform dismissal of the fact that it's sacred. It's there to produce life, and yet it's been rendered something utterly sterile by the culture. Only human beings are so absolutely broken that they could do that. They've completely robbed it of its life-giving force, you know? And when that's gone, then where's the limit? Where is the limit? But the icing on the cake of the whole thing is that I think that there's this attitude where people think that relationships begin with sex, when they don't. They should never do that, because that's such a fundamentally unstable thing to build anything on, that it's just going to fracture apart. And I think that's why the relationships that do develop, and there are some, like maybe 20-30% of the people I know are actually in relationships. Like, the relationships that I do see often break down because that becomes unstable. You can't build something like that on sex. You can't. And yet people seem to think that they can. And frankly, I can't think of any solution to this beyond people returning to God. I really can't. I can think of ways of mitigating it, which would make the universities look more like they did in the 1950s. But I don't think that you could sustain that unless people actually believed in some kind of moral law, which they simply don't. Because they believe that morals are feelings, most of them. And so they ignore them. There's this weird, like, anti-purgation that goes on, where people ignore their instinctive moral feelings in order to pursue these things, and therefore just drag themselves deeper and deeper into real problems. It's the exact opposite of the purgative way in Christianity, where you're purged of your sins. It's like they're taking on sins and deliberately ignoring their moral, instinct. I don't understand it, and even as an atheist I didn't understand it. But, I mean, it's all I can go on, because that's all I've seen. Now, assuming that this is a me kind of problem, and if I'm entirely honest, the fact that I laid out solutions should suggest to you that I don't think it is, then I need to have a real sit down. Because I'm meeting people who are just the utter antithesis of anything that I think is good. Repeatedly. And I have no idea why. If it's societal, then I think there needs to be a wider discussion about this. You have people like Matt Fradd and Jason Everett who are doing a good enough job, but first of all, by virtue of the fact that they're not in the midst of it at the moment, I don't think they have the clearest idea of what's going on, and that's perfectly fine. And I like to see that someone's trying to solve it. And second of all, I don't think that this can actually solve itself unless people our age, 21, 22, 19, 18, 20, do something. I don't see any way of it solving itself. And I have no idea what I'm going to do about it in my own life, let alone in the life of the society. So, I really want to hear your thoughts. I hope this wasn't too blackpilling. Thanks for watching. Thanks so much to all the new Renaissance Man subscribers, because we've grown massively over the last month or so. So many more people are enjoying audiobooks and controversial videos than were before. So I really hope those who are watching would consider signing up, because these people are clearly enjoying what they're getting. Thank you very much for watching.